Well, I'd like to welcome you to Lesson 2. And at the beginning of this lesson, I want you to sit back, relax, and forget about everything you know about African Americans and Latinos. Just forget about it all. No matter what you've heard about these two groups of people, I want you to absolutely forget about it. And I want to tell you a story. Um, that's what history is. It's really a story. And I want to tell you a story of two great peoples that lived and are living on this earth. And one group is the African Americans, and the other is the Latinos. And if any thoughts pop up in your mind as you begin to conjure considerations of what you know of these two peoples, I want you to just forget it for now. Forget it completely. Because the way history has been written, and typically as recorded in the textbooks, has not favored the glorious history of these two groups of people. Um, and we know this, that history many times is a story of the conquerors. And as a result, people who are either conquered or who get marginalized or who lose land, their story gets kind of interwoven sometimes as a footnote. At other times, only the dark parts of their history are highlighted. But I'd like to take a different approach in this lesson. I want you to understand the glorious history of African Americans and Latino students, and by doing this, you'll be able to give your students who are in these two categories of people a healthy perspective of where they came from, who they are, and what potential they possess. Let's go ahead and look at the topics that we'll cover. I'd like to go ahead and give this introduction as I am now, and then we're going to talk about the two groups of people. Part 1 will be African American history, and Part 2 will be Latino history. And in the educational platform, you'll be reading about these two histories in two different sections. And so, what are we doing when we talk about the history of these two people? Well, it's a known fact, and maybe it's not a known fact to every educator, but you can only produce a person or an individual or a child who has great aspirations for the future if you can help them see that they come from a family, from a heritage, and from an ancestry of greatness. It's just a simple fact. If you're an African American boy and the only thing you hear about your history is slavery, then servitude very much may be in your future. Or if you're a Latino girl and all you hear about is particular jobs, particular labor areas that your ancestors were in, but you're never told about how your ancestors were doctors and Nobel Prize winners and teachers. You're never told this, then you don't aspire and picture yourself having a future that's with greatness. And so the reason it's very important that you learn something about the history of these two people is because you're going to be helped to not only convince yourself of how much potential these students have in your class, based on the fact that their ancestors showed greatness and intellect and creativity and real contribution to the human race. Not only will you be convinced of that, but you'll be able to convince your students of this. And so let's go ahead and just talk about the three purposes for understanding history. Number one, it's to combat stereotypes. Two, it's to build counter narratives. Now, what is a counter narrative? We all have these voices that are in our head that talk through different reactions we have. And, I was an African American junior high boy at one point in time. And, there are these perceptions I'd have about myself and thoughts about my own ability or inability. When an educator challenges pessimistic narratives that run in my head, they basically build a new mind map in my brain and set me on a positive trajectory that's upward. So, a counter narrative is a narrative that an educator speaks in a classroom that counters the negative self thinking and self thoughts that students have about themselves for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because of race, sometimes it's because of a disability, sometimes it's just because they're having a bad day. But we have to become very good at building counter narratives. Number three is by understanding the history of students, you give students a sense of self identity and purpose. I can't tell you how big a point this is. Like, for instance, if there's a black boy and you just say he's an African, well, he probably doesn't know much about Africa. Now, if he's from Ethiopia and he migrated with his parents, Africa means something to him. But very likely, letting him know he's an American conjures up a sense of pride for him. Now, yes, he's an African American. And usually the labels and the categories that people have to fill out when they apply for different things. There's these bubbles you fill in, and you have to identify yourself as something. And so, to identify yourself as an African American is to say, I am of African descent, but I live in America, and I'm a proud American. And so, the labels, though, at times they don't reflect where a person comes from. And many times students, when they call themselves, Hispanic or Latino or African American, they don't know what to identify themselves as. If you live in Italy and you were born to Italian parents, you're Italian. And there's some honor in saying that because Italy is your country. But there are a good number of students who may be Latino or African American who are still growing in their confidence that America really is their country. And so, probably with Latinos, we should say Latino Americans to be absolutely accurate. Or if they're not from Latin America, they're from Spain, we should say Hispanic Americans. But generally speaking, when someone says who they are, what culture they are, and what race they are, they really need to identify the geography of where they come from. Okay, this is important for point number three. When students understand where they came from, what country they belong to, and the heritage and the history of their people in that country, they start to have a sense of self-identity and purpose. Let's start with the first group of people, African Americans. They're great people. And as you may or may not know, there's 41.7 million people in America who identify themselves as African American. So that's 13.2% of the United States population. Now, I'd like to go ahead and give you some history. Now, it's not my intention that you dive into a lot of details about the history, but I think it's important that you know enough about the history so that you appreciate the African American history as a history of people who are intelligent and who have persevered through struggles. And so the element of wanting to read, wanting to gain knowledge, wisdom, intelligence, and to gain freedom is something that's inherent in the African American history. I'm just going to show you 6 points, and I want you to memorize actually these 6 points. I hope after this class, when you're in your classroom, you would have these 6 points at the top of your tongue. It would be very impressive if during a teacher-student or a teacher-parent meeting, you were able to, with an African American family and their student, speak of these 6 items. It would be very impressive. Now, what are they? Here are some items in history. And again, consider these as items that help characterize these people as a great people. Number one, in 2000 BC, Egyptians, yes, Egypt is part of Africa, and so there should be some pride among the black students in your class that what happened in Africa is part of their heritage. So in 2000 BC, Egyptians used fractions to evaluate taxes on a piece of land. Mathematics is in the DNA of African Americans. There is no African American girl or African American boy who can ever give you the excuse that they're not good at math. In the 11th and 12th century, it was an era of education and art. In Timbuktu, there was the University of Timbuktu. And when you go back to that community of black people, you see that art and education were paramount. Then in 1619 through 1862, there was an era of slavery in America. This is a fact. Slavery is part of the heritage of African Americans, and yet they persevered through this part of history. Eventually, in 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, giving slaves freedom. And in 1964, there was a Civil Rights Act that gave African Americans equal rights as their white counterparts in America, and desegregation became something that was an official effort based on this Civil Rights Act. And then in 2008, we conclude with something that all of African Americans should be quite happy about, and that is a black president was elected in America, and that was Barack Obama. Okay, so now look at these 6 points. 2000 BC, Egyptians. They basically used fractions. They built pyramids. 11th and 12th century was an era of education and art. 1619 to 1862 was an era of slavery. 1863 was the Emancipation Proclamation. 1964, because of the resilience of this people, they basically fought for their rights. Sometimes it was peaceful, sometimes it was not so peaceful. But they declared their stand as those who are among what the Constitution says, we the people. And as a result of their voice, the Civil Rights Act was enacted. And then in 2008, President Obama was elected as the president. He's a black man. And so know this history, be able to articulate this history. And what I want you to particularly note in these 6 points is that point number 3 is not the starting point for African American history. That's the main point. You have to get that. You have to help the students in your class understand all the way back to 2000 BC, there were Africans who were using mathematics. And 11th and 12th century, there was a culturally rich art and education center. If you don't help the African American boys and girls in your class see that they have a rich history, then you won't be able to break their concept that they don't have to be at the bottom of the achievement gap. They can be up there at the top with whites, Asians, and everyone else in your class. And so by understanding this, I hope that you begin to have an appreciation for African Americans. Okay, now let's look at another group of people, Latino and Hispanics. Some basic facts here. Latino and Hispanic population in the United States is 54.1 million. Okay, how many was African American? Let's go back and show you real quick. It was 41.7. Latinos are 54.1 million. So you can see Latinos are a greater population in America. And I'll continue to read here. It says, with 34 million being of the Mexican origin, and those of Puerto Rican origin are at 4.9 million, and another 3.5 million are on the island of Puerto Rico. So this is 17% of the population of the United States. And then another fact here is there are more than 35 million people who speak Spanish at home, and 38% of all the Spanish speaking people say that Spanish is their dominant language. not English, but Spanish is their dominant language. Now, in the same way, I want to talk to you about this people as a people of great dignity, of conquest, of pioneering, and of incredible intelligence. I myself am African American, but some of my closest friends are Latino and Hispanic. And the intelligence, the passion, the kindness, um, I would just say the pleasantness of this group of people um, is something to be greatly honored. Let's look at their history in this realm of honor. In 750 BC, you had Mayan cities that began to develop in the area of Mexico and Central America. Architecture, building, measuring is in the blood of your Spanish-speaking students. In the 13th century, there was the Inca Empire in the area of Peru, a great empire. In 1493, Columbus lands at Puerto Rico. This is the start of colonization of North America as it relates to the United States. People think that really the starting point was, 1620 at Jamestown when some pilgrims traveled from England. No, that's not the starting point. Look here, it's not 1620, it's 1493. Columbus lands at Puerto Rico. And so there should be a strong sense of pride that the land of America is the land of the Latino and Hispanic people. They should be proud that America is their land as much as anybody else's land. In 1821, Mexico gained independence from Spain. 1898, Puerto Rico gains independence from Spain. In 2009, Sonia Sotomayor becomes Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. And, for those who would argue, well, we know that Obama became the president, and becoming a Supreme Court justice doesn't seem as powerful. Well, let me let you know this, and your students obviously should know this, is that once you're appointed to the Supreme Court justice, your longevity on that bench is longer than the president's. And so for Sonia Sotomayor, as someone of Latino Hispanic descent, and I'm combining Latino and Hispanic together, to actually have gone to Yale, she went to Princeton, and then she was appointed to sit on the Supreme Court is an awesome testament to the outstanding intelligence of this group of people. Okay, so now let's do an example of a counter narrative. Okay, so let's say you're teaching in class, and this is where the rubber meets the road of why it's important to understand something of the history of African Americans and Latinos. So let's say you have an African American student that says, blacks are not good at math. We're just not good at math. Maybe the Asians are good at math, but not blacks. Right away, you can give a counter narrative that says, in 2000 BC, blacks used fractions. And so I want to let you know, it's not true that blacks are not good at math. You have it in your heritage. Your ancestors were very good at math, and they used it in a way that benefited the world. That's a counter narrative. If you can get an African American girl or an African American boy in your class to basically end their day with a new sense of pride about their capacity to do something in the sciences or in mathematics or in English, history, arts, and to turn their back on any perspective that they're inferior among the human race, you have done a great work. You've done a great work. Let's do an example for a Latino student. So you have a Latino student says, walks in, let's say she's a teenage girl in 11th grade, and she says, none of my parents went to college. I don't intend to go either. We Latinos don't appreciate college. We are a people who labor. And so, let's just say she says, I want to be, when I grow up, someone who cleans hotel rooms. Well, you can come back and you can say, you know what? How about be someone who owns the hotel? You have that in you. In fact, you are so intelligent that let me tell you about one of your colleagues. Her name is Sonia Sotomayor. She went to Yale and Princeton and now sits on the Supreme Court. If you are to lead our nation, we need you to go to college. Now, there's nothing wrong with cleaning hotel rooms, absolutely. And if that's something you want to do, by all means, be the best one who does it. And if that's something that your parents are doing, that is an honor. All work is honor. But you must go to college. You must. You have to go to college. This is important for your life. It's important for the sake of your parents, for the sake of your family, for the sake of your future children, that you go to college, because it has been proven that those who go to college and make more money, and those who make more money have a better life, are able to contribute to society, and able to do things that those without the resources can't do. And so this is a little example of how history relates to your building counter narratives. I really hope you would memorize the points of the history under African American and the points under Hispanic and Latino. Now, in the two reading sections, you're going to see a lot more history than those 6 points, but I end both of those reading sections with just the points you need to know for the quizzes and for the sake of your homework. And so you don't need to know the whole world of all the details, but I do want you to read it. As far as what you need to definitely know and take away, you have to take away those points that are at the end of each of the reading sections, which are highlighted. Great, thank you very much.